One of the most influential, iconic, and famous pieces of modern art is this one called Marilyn Diptych by Andy Warhol. This is a screen painting of Marilyn Monroe at the peak of her youth and beauty. Warhol made it a short time after Marilyn's death in 1962. This artwork is notable not just because of the subject, Marilyn, but because of what it means to our pop culture and image-obsessed world. Some interpretations of this style of Warhol's art claim that repetition and pervasiveness makes an image meaningless. I don't quite agree with this interpretation. The image or the art doesn't become meaningless, the meaning changes and evolves. Ironically, good art becomes a blank canvas for us, the observers, to interpret, project, or force meaning onto. And while I'm pretty sure Andy would make fun of anyone who gives it the "it really makes you think" analysis to his work, there is one thing we should think about that puts his work into sharp focus. Whether it was Andy's intention or not, the repetition and pervasiveness of Marilyn's image in essence kills who she was as a person. Most people's familiarity with Marilyn is this image or others like it. All they know about her is the image. And even in this piece of art itself, it's only this part 99% of folks are familiar with. She exists as a symbol of beauty and glamour, the literal face of a ditzy blonde or the blonde bombshell. Both of these depictions she would grow to hate. That is what happens when image is all there is, all we are left with. We don't think about the person whose image that is or was. We just look at the image and draw conclusions based on preconceived notions or mood or other projections. In terms of an artist doing art like this, it's not really a problem. It wasn't Warhol's goal to have this divide happen between the image and the person whose image it was. Or maybe it was, to prove how detrimental obsession with image is.
We live in a society.
An artist doing art is fine, no problem. Huge, hyper-capitalist companies doing this caca to art and cultural icon Frida Kahlo is literally the worst thing and needs to stop. Using a person's image to make money is bad form. There are a lot of small artsy companies on Etsy or Instagram who reappropriate Frida Kahlo's image to make money. I'm not calling you out all in this video. I understand the struggle is real and you have to make money. I know. It's hard out here for a padrote or a madrota. I get it. And I don't judge. Frankly, I don't think Frida would judge either. She most likely wouldn't be thrilled with other people making money off of her image, but we all know you do what you have to in order to survive. Earn your pesos and your plata and take care of your loved ones. Plus, art is important. And if a great artist inspires your art, wonderful. Que Dios me los bendiga. The putos I'm dragging in this video are the hyper-capitalist companies who think they could use Frida's image for their phony #girlboss campaign. Using feminist figure Frida Kahlo on your fashion and makeup is the most transparent #lean in for money scheme ever. These companies on the surface might seem like they are just honoring an icon the way icons should be honored. But in this video, we're gonna explore why they are not. Like I talked about in the introduction, all most of us know about Frida is her image. Many people assume this beautiful brown woman who painted a lot of self-portraits would be okay with this. Look at all the self-portraits. She must have been vain. Since all we go by is image, a lot of us are not aware that Frida, a feminist, communist, staunch Mexicanist, would be the very first in line to stop these people from doing this caca. Let's go together and learn why and on how many levels this is wrong. Neta uno, why are we talking about this? What set off this whole video topic was while I was doing research for my holiday roast video, I stumbled across this article MTV posted reporting on Beyonce's Frida Halloween costume. Queen Bee dressing up as Frida as an homage isn't what's wrong here. This sentence in the article is: a few decades before Beyonce was born, Frida Kahlo was the crowning queen of the 20th century selfies. Wow. The crowning queen of the 20th century selfie. Ay chingao. I literally can't. Instead of setting fire to the internet, I thought it's better to correct people and their estúpido perception. Since we're here, let's take care of this one first. Neta do. Selfie Queen? Calling Frida the queen of selfies is misunderstanding her as a person, really misunderstanding her art, and misunderstanding art in general. Painting selfies is a very common thing in art. Almost all the major artists you've heard of have more than a few self-portraits in their work. Frida being crowned the queen of the selfies is very sexist. Why? Frida painted a total of 55 self-portraits, and sure, that sounds like a lot, but let's list off some other famous artists' selfie count. Picasso painted 30, Van Gogh painted 36, Gauguin painted 40, and if I'm not mistaken, Rembrandt has the most at 80. Correct me in the comments. These dudes and a ton of others are on par or have more selfies than Frida, but she is the selfie queen because she's a woman. These portraits are not an expression of art, they are vanity because women love to be looked at and admired. And it's not like we're expected to care about our appearance because, you know,
We live in a society.
And as many of our moms have reminded us, como te ven, te tratan. It's just that we're vain, and Frida with her self-portraits prove that. Thus, she is the selfie queen. That's gonna be an ugh from me. Frida wasn't so much vain as she was proud of her brown look. If she was vain, she wouldn't have painted herself with a mustache and unibrow. Also, Frida was bedridden most of her life, so the only thing she could paint was herself. When asked why she painted so many self-portraits, Frida said, "I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, because I am the person I know best." She didn't paint herself selfie style either. Frida's self-portraits masterfully convey her emotional state. The pain, the betrayal, loneliness, turmoil, it's all there. Ask any artist in any field and they will tell you getting honest, sincere emotions and feelings across so people will connect with the art is actually very difficult. Frida, a self-taught artist, being able to achieve that through the medium of paint is remarkable. One more topic we have to touch on before we move on is the concept of the gaze. Buckle up because my degree in film, television, and media studies is about to drop. In visual mediums like film, photography, paintings, there is a concept called the male gaze. Not the male gaze, but the male gaze. Yes, everyone who talks about this concept has to make that joke. The male gaze, or the male viewpoint, is a concept in filmmaking pioneered by film critic Laura Mulvey. Here is the basic, bare bones, beginner's explanation. The male viewpoint has been dominant in visual mediums. In film, all the filmmaking language we know and are familiar with was developed by men, specifically cisgendered heterosexual men. Generally, when you see a man on film, you admire and want to be them. When you see a woman, you gawk and want to be with them. Not always, but more times than not. When analyzing film or any art, meaning varies if your analysis is through the feminist lens, the LGBTQIA lens, or a socio-economic lens. All of these, mostly feminist theory, analyze the male gaze. It's not a hard and fast rule, but in mainstream American media, the male gaze is the only gaze we get. What about the female gaze, you liberal snowflake? I hear you ask. Some scholars will tell you any film or art made by a woman is the female gaze, but others, like Laura Mulvey, will tell you there is no such thing as the female gaze. Again, because in, for example, film language was developed by men, even if you're trying to frame men in a tantalizing way with standard film language, it's still the male gaze. In general, heterosexual women don't leer at men the way men leer at women. So the framing in like Magic Mike is still from the male point of view. Now these male gaze are on par for this example. Women don't frame sexy the same way. The female gaze is is less common, but not impossible to find. A great recent example is from the criminally underrated 2019 movie Hustlers, directed by Lorraine Scarafia. In the now iconic scene where Jennifer Lopez does the pole dance, the framing from the male gaze would be sexually arousing. Since the framing is from the female gaze, J-Lo's sexiness is weaponized and she becomes this force to be reckoned with. A true female gaze, I would argue. Another example, and pertinent to this video, is the art of Frida Kahlo. Look mom, I wrenched this back on topic. Frida's work is through the female gaze, not just because she was a woman, but because she reframed how women are depicted in art. I'm not an art historian, so I don't know who was the first artist to do the female gaze, but Frida is certainly a pioneer. Male artists have pretty much gotten away with painting softcore for centuries, framing women this way, classic male gaze. Many of Frida's paintings have her as the focus, but not for seductive reasons. She is trying to convey her emotional state, how complex her life and feelings are. This nudity isn't titillating. It is devastating and palpable. You can feel it. That's good art. Let me go ahead and destroy the selfie aspect now. Selfies have this superficial phoniness connotation to them. Since selfies are more associated with women, women are seen as superficial and phony. Also, makeup and fashion. We all know the jokes and the memes, trust issues. Art, though, through the female gaze is a lot more honest than art through the male gaze. The male gaze isn't just how women are framed, it's also about the men's too. As much as dude bros want us to think they are all about the gritty, honest realism, they're not. All of their heroes are glamorized to look cool and tough. It's just bland color palettes, a lot of face punching, dudes looking sexy and perfect in a no homo manly kind of way. There is more honesty here than here.
Save Martha! Why did you say that name?
Fight me. Realism is overrated anyway. Gritty realism is the reason the nightmare fever dream that is Tom Hooper's cats exists. So... in female gaze art, like in Frida's case, she paints in all her flaws and imperfections. Her art is all about honesty, authenticity, and should never be associated with selfies ever. Let's move on to the main reasons why this stuff is wrong. Side note, I'm not gonna do a timeline of Frida Kahlo's life. While doing research, almost all I could find about Frida was just a timeline of her life. And while that's important, a timeline doesn't really tell you much about Frida and who she was as a person. If you want a timeline, I'll link the better ones in the carcancha below. Or you could watch the 2002 Frida movie starring Salma Hayek. While I have big problems with that movie, as far as a timeline of Frida's life is concerned, it's a pretty good one. Since a timeline isn't adequate for the purposes of this video, I'm going to talk about 3 parts of Frida's identity: feminism, Mexicanism, and communism. There was more to her than those 3 things, but this isn't a survey class. I just want to give you a better idea of who Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderon was, and why she's such an important figure, not just in the world of art, but to brown women specifically, and why this garbage caca needs to stop. Let's do this. Neta 3. Feminism. In 1983, author and historian Hayden Herrera published a biography of Frida Kahlo, sparking a reinterest in the artist on an international level. For the majority of her life as an artist, Frida was only seen as the wife of Diego Rivera. This biography was a big step in getting people to recognize Frida as the revolutionary artist she was. This book is also credited with making Frida a feminist icon. Why? Because the book revealed to a white audience that Frida was a politically active queer woman who didn't abide by gender rules. Also, Frida's deeply personal paintings expressed frustrations with her role as a wife and not being able to become a mother, and how she wasn't afraid to be a weirdo. Even today, being weird is cool if you're a man, less cool if you're a woman. The only acceptable female weirdos are the manic pixie wish fulfillment girls in sad boy movies. These aren't 100% confirmed, but most historians believe these affairs happen. Frida had queer affairs with artist Georgia O'Keeffe, nightclub performer Josephine Baker, actress Dolores del Rio, actress Paulette Goddard, photographer Tina Modotti, singer Chavela Vargas, and those are just the ones we know about. Frida had a lot of lovers and affairs, and that might seem odd for an old-timey Mexican woman, but aside from the Sancho culture that exists in Latin America, the woman knew how to flex her pimp muscles. I know all this stuff is sexy and exciting, but based on the letters that exist, all Frida cared about was connecting with people. A person's gender didn't matter to her, further dispelling the idea that bisexual people are indecisive or greedy double dippers. Love is love, or maybe lust is lust, and that's fine too as long as it's consensual. We are all familiar with this style of dress Frida would wear. Very traditional female dress, but she would also dress like a man and wear pants at a time when women didn't wear pants. There are a lot of themes of gender fluidity, not just in the way she dressed, but in her art as well. Frida's famous unibrow and mustache weren't just a lack of grooming. She recognized that all of us have both masculine and feminine sides to us. The unibrow and mustache were her way of embracing her masculine side. Her feminine side was expressed, of course, with her traditional clothing. This traditional wear is from the Tehuanas of the Tehuantepec people of Oaxaca, Mexico. The Tehuanas are known for being and running their society as a matriarchy. The Tehuantepec people are closely related to the Zapotec people who embraced a third gender. Even by today's standards, these are super progressive and accepting societies. Frida, being a good feminist, embraced these people, their dress, and their traditions. Let's take a look at feminism in the art. Aside from the female gaze we covered earlier, the subject matter of the art is very significant. Frida would paint and draw the issues that affected her life as a woman. A lot of these issues are still very much controversial and taboo to this day. Abortion, miscarriage, fertility issues, incredibly intimate and specifically female. I'm not saying that all there is to being a woman are ovaries and uterus, but for the vast majority of us, those parts are a pretty big deal. There is a primal, dare I say, biological imperative to procreate, to have babies. Frida couldn't have children. A bus accident she was in when she was 18 damaged her reproductive system. For many women, Frida included, not being able to have children makes them feel like failures. They have failed as women because the one thing that women uniquely are able to do, grow life, they can't do it. So they feel like they failed. In a letter Frida wrote to her husband Diego Rivera, she expressed how she felt like a failure. All I've done is fail. When I came across this quote, it was presented in relation to her as an artist, but I have the feeling Frida was speaking more broadly and including her unsuccessful attempts to have children here. The whole not having children is a touchy subject in the broad female world. In the female Latin Hispanic world, it's even worse. For Hispanic and Latino folks, family is everything. There is nothing more important or sacred than family. Family is worth more than gold, diamonds, or Bitcoin combined. You might say, yeah, no duh, family is important for everyone, but you don't understand. Family is everything for us. Whether the family is blood related or friends who have turned into family over time, not being able to have your own family is a big deal in our culture. It always has been, and it probably always will be. Particularly with the stereotype regarding Hispanic and Latinos that women get pregnant the moment their husbands look at them. Try dealing with that stereotype while not being able to have kids. But wanting to be mothers isn't very feminist, I hear you say. You do realize one of our big beliefs is that of choice. It is your choice whether you want to have a family or not. We are pro-choice, not pro everyone gets an abortion and no one has children. It's not a thing. Also, publicly, Latino Hispanic families are patriarchal. Privately, we all know they're matriarchies. Who is in charge? Tu jefa, tu patrona, tu mami. So yes, it is very much feminist to want to be a mother. I'll go a step further and say that it's extra feminist, Frida wanted to be a mother, and because she couldn't, she was bold enough to put these strictly feminine problems into her art. As a consequence, these topics become less taboo and it creates necessary dialogue. So Frida's all about real feminism. I think it's safe to say this kind of hashtag girl power, hashtag girl boss, hashtag lean in faux corporate feminism is an insult to her. Wasn't she on the cover of French Vogue in 1937? How do you know she wouldn't like this? These people are just trying to honor her. Let's see if the next section is more convincing. Neta cuatro, Mexicayotl. Let me dispel a notion some folks are trying to push about Frida Kahlo. That she was white, rich, and was doing
cultural appropriation.
I'm gonna go ahead and say no. That's a big no. You have to be very careful when you're throwing around terms like
cultural appropriation,
because it is a very complex topic that the internet uses for outrage fuel. I'm not saying that
cultural appropriation
doesn't exist or that it's not bad. I'm just saying that if you're gonna accuse someone of it, you need to back it up with facts. Frida had a Hungarian father and a mestiza mother, and as I have pointed out before about Anglo-Latinos, being white isn't as cut and dry as you think it is. Eastern Europeans aren't considered white, and the old one-drop rule excludes a whole bunch of folks who look white from being categorized as white. Frida was a light-skinned Mexican, yes, but she was still Mexican and embraced a movement we are going to talk about in this section called Mexicayotl. Folks point to her privilege as a queer, disabled brown woman. That's an interesting definition of privilege, but okay. I realize there is some privilege there. Frida was able to get an education and did live in a middle-class neighborhood, but don't treat her like she was some white girl at Coachella wearing a Native American headdress for the gram. I read some folks accuse Frida of darkening her skin in her paintings, and that was wrong because she was white. Look at this photograph, taken by photographer Nicolas Murray. Does she look white to you? Watch out, she's about to call the manager. I don't think she was darkening her skin to look more native. I think she was just painting herself in her summer color. All of us melanin people have a summer color. This was hers. Also, painters, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it difficult to paint skin tones that are tan or darker? Since painting was, for the most part, the domain of sad white boys, most of the paintings were done of white people, and I'm guessing, in the grand tradition of not being inclusive, there were no paints in the skin tones of tan or darker. I know things like film stock and foundation shades were, and still are, made to cater to lighter skin tones. Painting darker skin tones is a whole skill to make sure the skin tones look like skin and not like dirt. It could also be the dry down on paint was darker than Frida anticipated. All possibilities. Native Mexican and Native Latin American heritage is not an easy thing to trace back. Anywhere from 50% to 80% of indigenous people were wiped out thanks to colonialism, genocide, and disease. In my video about answering the most racist question ever, I point out how it's a bold assumption to think we know what tribe we come from. Some of us think we are all Mexica, aka Aztec. More cultured folks think we are either Mexica or Maya or Inca, when there are literally hundreds of tribes, many of whom are still going strong in Latin America to this day. Frida, like many of us, knew she had a native lineage, but didn't know what lineage it was. She was either Tehuantepec or Purepecha. She didn't know, and neither do we. So because of the Mexicayotl movement, Frida went with the Tehuana, one of the possible tribes she was from, dress. Because Tehuana women invited her to join their traditions. That is not exactly
cultural appropriation,
especially since Frida didn't dress like that for financial gain or because it looked cool. She was helping popularize the Mexicayotl movement that championed indigenous people, so it's not so much
cultural appropriation
as it is cultural appreciation. Frida was fiercely Mexican. She wasn't just born in Mexico, so she had some pride Mexican. No. A few of her paintings depict how much she loved Mexico. When she traveled, she expressed how much she hated America, or as she called it, Gringolandia, and Paris. Parisians are too pretentious and not as clever as they think they are. I hate the French too, mija. French is just pretentious Spanish. Yeah, I said it. Frida famously called white folks boring and compared white faces to unbaked rolls. She was all about brown being beautiful and making sure indigenous people got respect. Mexicayotl, or Mexicanidad, it really took off in the 1950s, but indigenous Mexicans started the movement around the time of the Mexican Revolution. The only date I could find as a start date is 1920. A dude named Juan Luis Cárdenas is credited with starting this movement by teaching people Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica. The Mexicayotl movement was embraced by President Lázaro Cárdenas. This movement is best summed up by this quote from Licenciado Rodolfo Fernando Nieva López Zenquitza-Cuajutl. To regain the freedom we lost in the 16th century, Mexicans must become independent from foreign culture and readopt Mexican culture in order to fulfill the high destinations of the race that are of well-being and greatness. In basic terms, being indigenous is great, and stop acting like the only folks who did anything of note or who matter are the European white. Indigenous folks in Mexico who were able to get an education and influence politicians want Mexico and Mexicans to stop marginalizing Native people. Stop treating Native people like they are these backwards thinking, no use to society savages. Until relatively recently, was there a push to learn about Indigenous people, elect them to public office, celebrate their customs and traditions. Because Native people have been marginalized for so long is the reason why so many of us don't know what tribe we come from, if we have that lineage. To this day, one of the worst insults you could lob at someone in Mexico is calling them an Indio. Many folks in Latin America pretend like indigenous folks don't exist or they don't have that lineage. They are of pure white European noble.
Sure, Jan.
That's why movements like Mexicayotl are important. While Frida didn't invent it, she did the activism and made more people aware of Mexicanidad. Frida's art reflects not only her passion for all things Mexican, but it does an extra interesting thing. The art tries to reconcile both sides of her background. In her very honest way, Frida made Mexicanidad authentic to her background. Had Frida pretended her background was only indigenous, that would have been a lie. Then I'd agree with all the folks who accuse her of
cultural appropriation.
Usually folks who have mixed ethnic backgrounds choose one or the other. For some strange reason, if you're mixed, you're seen as the weaker parts of two ethnicities, not how it actually is. You're the stronger part. This is extremely relatable for me, even though I am not mixed. I am the child of immigrants, and there is a part to being a child of immigrants where you have what my sister calls the Worf from Star Trek The Next Generation problem. You're too human for the Klingons and too Klingon for the humans. Whether you're mixed or an immigrant, there are two sides of you have to make peace with. Let's look at some art. Appropriately, duality is a theme that is ever present in Frida's work. The most famous example of this is the painting The Two Fridas. Here, Frida is quite literally beside herself. One side of the painting has a lighter skinned, more European looking Frida. The other has the darker skinned, traditional looking Frida. The light Frida is weaker and bleeding to death. The darker Frida is strong and her heart is keeping both of them alive. Even though this painting is a representation of the duality of her ethnic identity, she clearly prefers and thinks the native Mexican side is better, stronger, more resilient. Mexicanidad in a painting. Let's take a look at two more paintings. Both of these were painted while Frida was in the US for a 3-year span of time because Diego got mural painting work in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York City. Self-portrait on the borderline between Mexico and the United States, and my dress hangs there. In the borderline painting, to her right is the US, more specifically Detroit, Michigan. To her left is Mexico and Mexican iconography. Part of an Aztec pyramid, the sun and moon out of a loteria deck of cards, skulls, statues, and plants. Frida is facing the Mexican side and has a Mexican flag in her hand, showing that even though she was in Detroit at the time she painted this, her spirit was and will forever be in Mexico. In the painting, my dress hangs there. We'll talk a little more about in the next section. Here, it is more obvious how much Frida misses Mexico. By this point, Frida thought America was the absolute worst and could not wait to get back to Mexico. This painting literalizes, while her body was in America, her heart was in Mexico. I'd argue Frida took Mexicanidad to a more honest conclusion. A lot of us are a mixture of a lot of ethnicities. We are not just mestizos, but castizos, mulattos, pardos, etc. Ethnic identity isn't just one concrete thing, and you could only be that. Duality, triality, or moralities are in all of us, and we have to figure out for ourselves our own identity and path. We have to figure out how to reconcile all sides. Just remain respectful. Unlike the corporations who turned Frida into a Snapchat filter, they lightened her skin and took away the mustache. Or the Frida Barbie doll. Barbie is the epitome of Western white beauty standards, and they turned Frida into a Barbie doll. Or how about designers who treat the way she dressed as merely fashion? These are not the threads of honoring people or traditions. This misses the point of why Frida dressed this way and turns traditional clothing into an ethnically corrupt fashion trend. Frida would be okay with none of this. Are you sure? How do you know she wouldn't be honored with any of this? She might have been flattered. She could have made money from this. Okay, time to pull out the big guns. Neta 5, communism. Yay! I left the least controversial topic for the end. Órale. The fact that Frida was a communist is something that isn't really talked about. And I know why it's not. En el año de nuestro Señor 2021, an ideology like communism is still vilified. We are not in the Cold War anymore, and a lot of people agree with more extreme leftist ideas. Communism is still the big bad scary guy in politics. And if you want people to know about and revere someone like Frida Kahlo, you're gonna have to leave out the communism part. Kind of ironic because Frida believed the personal is political. As we have seen, all of her art is deeply personal, so it is also deeply political. In this section, I'm not going to go into communist theory. There is way too much to go through and too many different schools. It would be impossible to cover it all in a couple of minutes. I believe it is very irresponsible to read a Cliff's Notes version of a complex ideology like communism and say, yes, I am an expert now. Allow me to speak on this topic like the expert I am. I'm just a brown girl on YouTube. This isn't Fox News. Communism has been very present in Latin America. Famously, Cuba is communist. Well, it's more of a dictatorship that calls itself communism, but okay. The Communist Party in Mexico, called El Partido Comunista Mexicano, was founded in 1917 and hasn't made much of a dent in politics since the 1980s. Frida was a staunch communist and was a member of a Mexican Communist Party. From the little research I could find, Frida started out a Stalinist and moved to being a Trotskyist. Famously, Trotsky and his wife were exiled from Russia and took refuge in Frida and Diego's house, La Casa Azul. In bare basics, correct me in the comments, Trotskyism is communism where you have to have revolutions all the time. Once the revolution happens, that doesn't mean your job is done. You have to keep working and doing revolutions. Sounds exhausting, but necessary. Some people will point to Frida being a communist because she had a supposed affair with Trotsky. Some historians say she did, others say she didn't. And I don't think who she did or didn't sleep with proves any political leanings. She was a communist before Trotsky and continued to be one after. Frida wore communism like a badge of honor. She would paint her medical corsets with the hammer and sickle of the communist flag. When Frida died, her casket was draped with the communist flag. A lot of her art also reflected the communist ideology she abided by. Let's go back to this painting. My dress hangs there. there. Aside from Frida missing Mexico, this painting shows how she viewed America. Capitalism and American democracy are detrimental to the American worker. We idolize opulent movie stars and ignore poverty and social injustice. Our greatest accomplishments are the toilet and awarding ourselves trophies for frivolous stuff. How do you really feel, Frida? If that wasn't clear enough, she also painted this self-portrait with Stalin. In the painting Moses, Frida included Marx and Stalin among other notable folk. Finally, there is the painting Marxism Will Heal the Sick that has Marx choking an American eagle while Frida holds the Communist Manifesto. In this one, Frida is expressing her anger and frustration at having healthcare be an extreme for-profit venture. If you don't have the money, you can die, and under a system like capitalism, that's okay. Breaking it down that way, it's very unjust. Again, it's fascinating having Frida communicate her political ideology, and this is never talked about. To most people, she's just the selfie queen. Knowing this, and knowing that communism is very critical of capitalism, do you think she would be okay with hyper-capitalist companies making money off of her image? Really, anyone making money off of her image. Honor Frida, but don't exploit her for your own financial gains. It's sleazy. All of this is making Frida roll over in her communist grave. I hope this little journey we took together better proves why this crap needs to stop. It won't, but it should. If you only knew Frida as a selfie queen, hopefully you know better now. If you were looking for a deeper dive, I hope I delivered. Like I said earlier, there were many sides to Frida Kahlo. We briefly covered only a few. Enough to give you a better idea of who she was, but still not enough to paint a definitive picture of her. I'd like to close this out with a quote from one of Frida's closest friends, Alejandro Gomez Arias. Who was Frida Kahlo? It is not possible to find an exact answer. So contradictory and multiple was the personality of this woman that it may be said that many Fridas existed. Perhaps none of them was the one she wanted to be. Deeper study is needed into the art of this complex woman. Actual art historians have to break down Frida's art more thoroughly than I ever could. Let me know how you interpret Frida's work after this video or in general. Salud, familia.